So today, our conversation is on a day in the life of a cloud engineer, and we are joined by two of our Udacity alumni. So we're going to be asking them some questions to learn more about their experience and what they're working on today. We are going to have a live Q&A session at the end where you can either ask questions directly in the chat, and I will ask them on your behalf, or you can unmute yourself and ask as well. So if you have any questions, go ahead and reserve them for the end so that way we can ask them all at the same time. Go ahead. For whoever just joined, go ahead and please mute yourself. That'd be much appreciated. Okay, so let's, my name is Rachel. I am a member of the Udacity careers team. I'm a program manager on our content and services side, who essentially that means I am in charge of building out and maintaining the career content that you guys have access to as part of any nano degree that you enroll in, as well as the additional service programs that you have access to should you enroll. So that includes some career coaching, that includes career projects like a resume review, etc. So just know that if you participated in any of those, that is my doing. Me and my team, we've built that out and provide that for you guys. And I have I've worked at Udacity for about the last 4 years, and I've gotten to see a lot of the exciting changes we've done and how careers has kind of taken off within those. And I'm excited to have two graduates of different nano degree programs today who are sharing their experience with their job search post Udacity. So without further ado, today's agenda is we're going to meet our guests, so Tianzi and Robert, and then we're going to go into a brief introduction into like what is cloud computing, and so that way you guys have some context to set up the rest of the chat today. Then from there, we're going to move into a question and answer portion where I have some questions I'm going to be asking both Tianzi and Robert about their experience with Udacity and actually after as well. So what are they doing today? And then we're going to talk a little bit about the future of cloud computing in careers and where do they see it going. And then we're going to take some questions. So that's going to be when you guys can ask your questions. So maybe save them to the very end and ask them then. Okay. So our first alumni guest is Robert Crowe. Robert was kind enough to share a little bit of his bio with us, which is here presented on the slide. But Robert, I'd love for you to take the opportunity now to kind of introduce yourself and share with our participants today a little bit about you.
Well, hi, I'm Robert Crowe. I'm a developer advocate at Google in the TensorFlow team. And a developer advocate is kind of a liaison between a product development team and the developers who are using the software or hardware that the team is developing. So my background is I've been in software for a long time. I was managing a consulting group for several years, doing primarily web development, web application development, really. So things like, CMS or custom systems, that kind of thing. I just kind of gradually drifted into more of a data science focus. I had some earlier work that I did in data science, and I kind of went back to that. And eventually did 2 different nano degrees, and I'm actually currently working on a third. So I did the machine learning nano degree and the artificial intelligence nano degree. So those led to me making a career change, or I guess it was sort of part of the process of doing a career change. I moved into a role as a data scientist, a startup here in Cupertino. Worked there for about a year. And then Google called and described this role. And at first, I was like, well, developer advocate. I mean, I really like TensorFlow, but I'm not sure that's really what I want to do. And then I went and talked to people and, listened to what is actually involved in the role, what the daily, the day-to-day life is and so forth. And That actually sounded like a lot of fun, so I really couldn't turn it down. So that's how I got where I am. I'm happy to go into depth in any of that, but
Well, maybe you could share with us the current, so you mentioned that you're currently working on a nanodegree. Which one is it?
AI and trading.
Okay.
So I, you know, it's a branch of AI. There's a lot of finance involved in it. It seemed like it'd be interesting. It is interesting.
Mm-hmm. So we'll get into a little, I think we'll be able to get a little bit more into detail on like what you've studied and how you see it relating to your current job as well as the future. But first, I would like to take some time to introduce Tianzi. But first, before I do that, can anybody who just joined who isn't muted, please mute yourself? It's really hard. There's a lot of background noise, and it's definitely hard for us to focus. So I'm assuming it's hard for guests to focus. And also I want to make sure that the audio recording for this recording is as good as possible for any people who watch after. Okay, so Tianzi, go ahead and share with us a little bit about you, what brought you to Udacity, and any additional information on your background.
Yes, sure. I was working as a data scientist in the media industry when I heard about the self-driving car nanodegree, and I was one of the first to sign up and had a lot of fun, a lot of challenges doing that nanodegree. And very fortunately, after that, was able to get interviews with Google, Amazon, and some car companies, and I chose Google in the end. And I am working as a developer programs engineer in Google for the Google Cloud team, specifically in the space of data analytics and ML right now. And I'm still learning the ropes, still learning how to do my job well. Very new to cloud. And I'm happy to share whatever that can be useful for people coming into this space.
Great, thank you. So for those of you who, we're going to switch really quickly into just some like context for cloud computing. So for those of you who are joining without a lot of understanding or background into what it is, here's just a high level overview. So today's all companies seem to be adopting a new way of hosting information on the cloud as things. I think we've all heard about it, but what is it, right? And what does it do and who works on it? And it's the industry itself is projected to grow. Obviously, about 17.3% and into a over $2 billion industry throughout the rest of 2019. Which means there's a lot of opportunity for folks who are trying to get into it. And there's a lot of, and I think that both Robert and Tianzi can speak to that a little bit in terms of what they see on their day-to-day kind of functions and what they're doing within their jobs at the moment. So there's quite a number of services that allow folks to work within the cloud. So Google is one of them. So is AWS, which I think is one of the ones that people think about automatically when they think of the cloud. And sorry, I have allergies. So what we are, the Nanodegree programs in the School of Cloud Computing that the Udacity has launched, and we'll be having our first Nanodegree classes open next week, are helping students to kind of navigate this and get an introduction into cloud computing and what it means to work in that space and eventually go on to be a developer. So with that, I wanted to start talking to both Tianzi and Robert about a little bit more about their background, and starting with your experience as a Udacity student, like what brought you to Udacity and kind of the transition that you took after that. So you guys both were working in the industry in different spaces before. And I wanted to know a little bit more from both of you about what was it specifically about Udacity that drew you to a nano degree, and why did you choose to enroll in this type of a program versus others?
I can start first. Yeah. I remember in November 2015, I remember there was an announcement from Google that it's making its machine learning framework public, and that's TensorFlow. And I looked around for like classes I could take to learn more about TensorFlow. And I remember Udacity has one. And I don't remember seeing things on Coursera and edX, which are the other two that I was using at the time. And I took that, and the videos were really short because it's like the content was quite intense. I remember spending like 3-4 months working through that small course, and it just gave me the impression that Udacity is very quick to turn something that's cutting edge into something that people like me, like a working professional, could take. And when the self-driving car nano degree came out, like it was the same thing. Like nobody else is teaching self-driving car technology, and I have always wanted to work in some futuristic technology, and that just caught my attention, and I really, really wanted to enroll, and I applied.
Great. What about you, Robert? What was your experience?
So I didn't start with Udacity in terms of online resources. I started with, I think it was edX. I took a class, a 2-series class in Spark and Spark ML. And that kind of, that was because I had previous experience with Hadoop, and I knew that Spark was coming along. So that led to the Andrew Ng Coursera course, which is sort of canonical in the industry if you're going to do any kind of ML. And it's a good foundation, but it's just one course. It's not a degree. So I was looking for more depth after that. I mean, I felt like I had the beginnings, but I wanted more depth. So I was looking around at some of the other offerings that are around, and there's a lot of them. But Udacity just seemed, from what I could tell looking at the syllabus and so forth, it seemed to be the highest quality. So that's what I was interested in, and I started with the ML Nanodegree, and since then I kind of just stuck with Udacity. I don't know. I should probably look again, but I haven't.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up question, is the fact that you've taken now you're on your 3rd nano degree with us a signal that you find value in the program, or is it that you are just interested by the programs that we offer, and you've just decided to continue to enroll?
Well, I'm kind of driven by my interests. So that's like, I'm not looking to get a job in finance or anything for this current nano degree. It's more just something I'm interested in. Yeah, so, and in fact, when I took the other 2 nano degrees, I wasn't really sure I was going to work as a data scientist or where I was going to work. I was more interested in sort of building a general skill set in an area that I was interested in. And then, just kind of look around at careers after that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was aware there's a lot of different roles out there and a lot of different types of companies. So it wasn't like I was unaware of the job market, but I hadn't really picked a particular direction yet.
And I think you guys are both actually like living examples of the fact that continued education and just skill development, whether it is to upskill yourself and get a new job or for just personal fulfillment, can open new doors and new opportunities, which is why lifelong education is such a critical part of obviously what we're trying to do at Udacity, and I think just such a vital part for personal growth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would totally amplify that. The other thing that I've seen happen is this rise of online education, which you could view in different ways. I think traditional institutions probably are starting to view it more positively, but it's sort of a competitor for them as well. But the luxury that provides of being able to follow your interests with the schedule that you have, and have a very focused, very very condensed curriculum, but is very high quality. That's something that just didn't exist, 10 years ago?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's been great.
And I think you guys are both also, and we'll get into this more, I think, in as we continue on through our conversation, but you guys also are representative of the fact that so within a nano degree and within the skills you learn in a program, it actually allows you a lot of opportunities to take that information and to take that skill and kind of parlay it into a number of opportunities in terms of a job search, if that's the direction you're choosing to go in. So going from data science into machine learning and now into cloud computing, like that's a trajectory that maybe you guys, neither one of you would have thought that you would have taken after completing this nano degree or even when you enrolled in it. But it's definitely, I think, a representative of the fact that with new skills, doors open and new opportunities present themselves. And being open is kind of a critical part of that. So my next question for you both is specifically, like, what was the most impactful part of your Udacity experience or part of your nano degree? Was it like a specific project that you took or something you engaged in or participated in after graduating even? Was there that kind of moment for you? And if so, what was it? And it's okay if there wasn't. It's okay too.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest impact of is I was able to build confidence. Build confidence in doing software engineering plus ML, things that's not data science. The content of the self-driving car nano degree was challenging. I remember there's like 3 terms. The first term was using computer vision, using ML for computer vision for self-driving cars, and that's still in my domain. Not in my domain, like something that I can do. I just need to challenge myself a little bit. And then the second term and the third term go into things like C++ and localization and Kalman filters and system integration. All of those are things I have never ever studied, and just working it through and knowing that there are people with me who are also new to this and they're working through this. Just all of that was like a great positive energy, and I was able to, like, after everything's done, I feel such a tremendous sense of like achievement, and it really built my confidence.
Good. So it helped you kind of bridge the gap of confidence, because I think that's something we all struggle with, regardless of the career path we are trying to get into and even our background. Every graduate I've ever worked with on their job search talks about having a lack of confidence. So I think that's a key one. Something else that you mentioned was you started to kind of refer to the community piece, and knowing that there are other people working alongside you that are also doing the same things and possibly struggling, kind of kept you motivated. And I think community and kind of peer engagement is definitely something we are trying to emphasize and make part of our future nano degree offering. So that's key. Glad you mentioned that. So you both touched on this a little bit in terms of what your post nano degree experience was like, but when you completed it, did you initially intend did you go into this intending to search for a job, or what was it after for you, Robert, for example? Was it when you got contacted by Google, for example, about a new opportunity that really kind of struck you in terms of, oh yeah, I can make a career switch, or was it something you were toying around with even before that initial contact?
So it was before that. It was well before that. I had a client where I was doing an ML project, doing predicting movement of people through airports. So that was through my consulting firm. And then from there, I went to a startup
Okay.
working as a data scientist in the networking field. So worked there for a little over a year. And it was only after that Google contacted me. So I was well past the nanodegree graduation stage by that time.
Okay.
But I'll tell you what struck me when I was at the startup. We were interviewing like crazy, trying to find more data scientists because we needed like
Mm-hmm.
3 more at least, and we were interviewing people with masters and PhDs, and I would ask them interview questions about ML, and they didn't, like 9 out of 10 at least did not know the answers. and that's when it kind of struck me that this nano degree thing, well, I guess it was pretty good after all.
Well, glad to hear that when you were interviewing other people, it hit you that you actually learned a lot in your program. Do you feel like, do you think that was isolated to just that type of role? Or do you think that, like, for example, your experience going through the data science side, whoever can please make sure that you guys are muted too. I hear somebody talking. Okay, I think I was able to mute them. And I lost my train of thought. So do you feel as though, would you expect that type of same positive like outcomes for folks who, I mean, maybe this isn't answerable, right? Because if you haven't taken any other nano degree, you don't know exactly what the content is or what's covered in it. But do you feel like it was like that kind of realization that you had was specific to your experience in a nano degree? Do you think that, and therefore maybe other people who complete other nano degrees could have like a leg up in interviewing down the road simply because of what they learn and the fact that it kind of is like there's grit behind it and they're self-driven? Do you feel like that's an assertion that maybe you can make, or maybe I'm trying to like jump and ask a question that's just not even possible right now?
Yeah, kind of. So, I mean, I think there's a certain type of person who can do a nano degree in the first place. It's just you have to be, pretty self-organized and self-driven, because there's not someone forcing you to go to class every week or something. But in general, I mean, I think. Yeah, I can only really speak for the nano degrees I did, but I mean, I think the quality of education is pretty high.
Okay.
So what surprised me was that we were not getting people from traditional institutions did not seem to have the same level of education. So that's not all of them. I mean, we definitely had some that were really sharp, but that was the surprise for me. They had more of a general background in things like statistics and more traditional data analytics, and not so much in ML and software development.
Okay, makes sense. So then what did you guys do to prepare when you guys were interviewing? So when you got that call from Google or Tianzi, when you were preparing to go to that in-person event, what were some of the preparation tools that you guys used or practice methodologies that you put into practice for yourself personally?
For me, the very first interview happened on a physical hiring event. I think that was organized by Udacity. It was in California. I was in New York at the time. I was so, I really, really wanted to transition from media to tech. I was willing to pay the flight from my own pocket money, and I came to California just so I could meet some of the companies that are hiring. And to prepare for that, Udacity actually was offered, what would I call them? They are like interview coaching from I think other Udacity students, but who are more who have been like taught how to coach us. So I signed up for a call with a data scientist. He was based in Canada, and he was so helpful. He coached me for half an hour of what to say, and he also looked at my resume. He after the call, he sent me an email with just so many resources to look at, like what are the 10 questions to prepare for an ML job, for a data science job, and I benefited from that. The very first interview wasn't technical. It's just you get 15 minutes, you sit down with someone from that company, and they will go over your resume and learn about what you do. So that very first one was just prepared from the resources that Udacity was able to give me.
Okay. So talking to somebody else to kind of practice helped you.
Yes.
Okay. Robert, what about you? Was there anything specific that you did or practiced?
Well, yeah, so the whole, there was a whole like term almost after you finish the Nanodegree where it's all about career development and resume development and so forth. And I'd been running a consulting firm for several years, so I hadn't interviewed for, except to interview with clients. I hadn't done that kind of thing for a long time. So, so the help with the resume and, just interviewing was good. There were some other resources that I also used. There's a book called Cracking the Coding Interview, which is very useful. There's also a service called Pramp or PRAMP, very useful for working on coding interviews because you do this phone screen thing where you're coding online, usually in a document instead of an IDE.
Yeah.
So that takes some getting used to, and that was good practice. And also, I mean, Google was not the first place. I interviewed with a lot of other places. I interviewed with Facebook and Amazon.
Okay.
And actually, that was the second interview with Google. So,
So what advice would you guys have for a student or a graduate or anybody that's about to go into an interview? Is there like one piece of advice that you could give them? So just since we're talking about interviews right now.
Yeah, there's a tendency to worry about the interview and worry about freezing up. And I've definitely felt that. But when I actually, after doing a few interviews, it got easier. So the first ones were harder. So my advice is just, interview as much as you can.
Yeah.
And maybe schedule a few interviews at the beginning that for places where you maybe are not as interested in working. Yeah. Just for the practice.
That's some of the advice that we used to give graduates who we were working with one-on-one. So, yep, I fully support that. What about you, Tianzi? Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Pretty much the same as what Robert said. Don't give up, just keep trying.
Yeah. I like to say, have interviews as practice interviews. Nothing really creates the environment of an actual interview, like an interview, right? There's never the same nerves. There's never the same like moment of suspense and kind of uncertainty. So, yeah. Okay. So now I would like to kind of switch into digging in deeper into what your current roles are and what you're doing on a daily basis. So Tianzi, I'd like to start with you. You had mentioned when we were preparing for this that your role is kind of like the way you described it was like 80% of your job is working in programming, and then 80% of that 80% is working in the cloud, and the other 20% is working in ML and like the AI space. So I'd love to kind of hear a little bit more from you about what that actually looks like and what are you working on as a developer programs engineer. So maybe kind of explain that a little bit more and kind of walking us through like a day, your day.
Okay. So you're right that about 80% of my time is spent on more engineering type of work, and then 20% education related type of work. And out of that 80% engineering, 80% I spend on a Google Cloud product. It's called Cloud PubSub. And the other 20% I spend on Cloud ML. all kinds of ML APIs. So what do I do in my day? Every day is different, but these are the 3 buckets of things that I see myself doing. The first bucket is I figure out what developers are struggling with, what they're complaining about, what kind of things they would like us to have in the space of PubSub and ML. And I basically gather feedback, input. I talk to the engineers. I talk to the product manager. I talk to the tech writer. I figure out what the friction is when people use PubSub, for instance. And the second thing is I will then figure out, okay, first I understand their problems, and then I figure out how to solve the problem. Or if it's not a problem, if it's a new feature that's coming out for Cloud PubSub, then following the second bucket is I need to understand how the feature works before it gets released to the public. Or I need to figure out what's the best way to help that developer with a particular problem. And the third bucket is once I figure something out, I share that knowledge through, could be a tutorial, could be some sample codes that we put on GitHub, could be me just tweeting that something has been fixed, or reaching out to the developer or to the larger community that this is available for them to use now. So every day is different, but this is like the overarching story.
Overarching themes in your day-to-day work. Yeah. Okay. What about your job do you enjoy the most?
I am constantly learning new things, and I like going from something that what DevRel appealed to me most is that they're looking for people who really loves learning, and they're looking for people who are empathetic towards developers' pain. So love of learning, love for learning, So,
and it sounds like you also do a lot of work to make things simpler for others. So it's learning, but it's also trying to provide solutions that improve the lives of other developers. And I think there's a lot that can be taken out of that. So that's great. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So Robert, what about you? Can you give us a little bit more insight into what a developer advocate does and what your day-to-day life looks like?
Sure. So I work with the TensorFlow team, and my team, the DevRel team, we have 7 DAs or developer advocates, and 2 DPEs or developer program engineers, and 2 tech writers. And we're like, the team is tasked for the whole TensorFlow universe. So there's like core TensorFlow, and then there's all these other parts of TensorFlow. There's TensorFlow Lite, TensorFlow JS, TensorFlow Serving. There's TensorFlow Ranking. There's all these different parts of TensorFlow. So we divide those up, and we each have a different focus. My focus is what's called TensorFlow Extended, or TFX. And TFX is the TensorFlow platform that you use to, when you have a trained model, you want to put it into production. So you make it available to the world. That could mean putting it on a server, or it could mean deploying it as a mobile application or as a JavaScript application. So that's my focus. And then within that, as a developer advocate, my job is to try to make it really communicate out to developers who are using it, how to use it and what the story is. So there's a lot of parts to that. I just yesterday shot a series of 5 YouTube videos that will be coming up here. So I do things like that. I'm writing blog posts. There's a lot of that, and those are, they're technical blog posts, but they're also, it's a writing thing. I do a lot of development of examples and collabs, and I developed a workshop and taught the workshop, and I'm going to Europe and Asia here next week to deliver that workshop, and so it's a lot of different things all around sort of this central focus of this one software platform.
Okay.
And along with that, of course, nothing stands still. So as Tianzi said, I'm learning every day. There's new stuff every day, which, it can be challenging. It moves fast, but it's also a lot of fun. So I really like that.
Yeah, I think people have a wrong conception or a misconception that when you get a job, it's almost like learning is done. Like their life is segmented into education and then work. And oftentimes that's not the case. If you are done learning, you're probably you may want, or if you're done like feeling inspired to learn or excited to learn, then you might need to find a new job or a new career path or company if you're no longer inspired to do that. So
Yep.
yeah. So one question I had for you, Robert, was something that we touched on while we were holding our preparation session. And you mentioned that your team, the team you're currently on, is no longer specifically part of like the Google Cloud organization, and instead you're part of Google Research. So is there anything that you're doing today that is related to like the cloud computing space, or anything that are there any kind of like ties over there?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So TFX, the product that I'm focused on, you need to deploy it somewhere. So there's really two choices there. You could deploy it on a cloud, or you could deploy it on premises, like in a local data center. And what we're seeing in the industry in reality is that there are a lot of workloads that are still deployed into data centers. In fact, the vast majority are still deployed into data centers, but increasingly they are migrating to the cloud. There's reasons for that. In some cases, there's like legal or regulatory requirements for the data, and there's privacy concerns as well that you need to manage, as well as where you keep, as far as where you keep what data. So for me, the cloud piece of that is understanding the cloud offering that goes along with TFX.
Okay.
So TFX as a service is wrapped into something called Kubeflow, or Kubeflow pipelines, and Tianzi may be familiar with that. But that becomes an option for people. When I'm going out and talking to people about TFX, if they're interested in the cloud deployment, then I'm pointing them at Kubeflow or Kubeflow pipelines as the way to do that. And what that does is it wraps TFX into a Kubernetes environment, and there's a lot of scaling and management that goes along with that. So it becomes a very powerful kind of solution. But at the same time, you can have a hybrid deployment where you're keeping some of your pipeline on-prem and controlling that data, and then scaling a part of your pipeline onto the cloud. So understanding cloud deployments and cloud computing is a real important part of what I'm doing, and frankly, what everybody's doing in the industry. I mean, you can't go anywhere where there isn't cloud happening. The startup that I came from, we were running 100% on the cloud. There was no physical data center anywhere, and that was a 24/7 real-time application. So it was a challenging environment, but they put together some great technology to do that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the explanation. Thank you. That definitely helps kind of clarify. I think it shows like how the cloud and cloud computing is why it's becoming such a big industry and why there's now such a need for it. And the fact that there's now going to there's going to be a lot of job opportunities in it for those who are interested. So thank you. I appreciate the time you spent there. So I wanted to kind of talk to you guys both, less about your experience and more about where do you see this going in the future. So what I think I would like to first start with is any advice that you would give a fellow student or a graduate about how to make the most out of their nano degree and therefore job search. Any just a piece of advice or anything you'd like to pass on?
I think do a great job on the projects in the nano degree, and also learn to talk about the projects to people of different backgrounds. Somebody who have technical background, someone who maybe doesn't have that technical background.
So for you working with that, the combination of the projects you completed in the program and then also the work you did with the career counselor after made for a good combination for you.
Yes.
Okay. Anything that you'd like to include or something different you'd like to share, Robert?
Well, so, I mean, I would, echo what Tianzi says. The other thing that comes to mind is the nano degree gives you kind of the background and the framework in a lot of different areas, but you need to try to read in the field too. So learn to read papers, try to keep up on blog posts and things, because the nano degrees are developed as sort of a snapshot in time, but that field keeps moving forward. So you need to get in the habit of just kind of staying on top of things.
Yeah. So again, we're never done learning. Learning always has to happen. There's always some component of research and personal development and all of that, because I think the one thing that will remain constant within our job search is us. Everything else around us is going to be the agents of change, and we sometimes need to match ourselves to that versus expecting it to match us. That's been my piece of personal feedback and just over the last 15 years of a job search personally, things I've noticed. So let's see here. The next set of questions are kind of, where do you guys see, what do you think is in future or in store for the future of careers in cloud computing, based on what you're doing today and what you've been working on and just the journeys you've taken? What do you think is next?
Well, the future of cloud computing has been
too big to answer.
It's kind of a lot, yeah. So there's been a development of the initial sort of cloud platforms, and a lot of it was focused on providing managed services. And there's a lot of advantages to managed services, but there needs to be, if you're doing hybrid deployments, there needs to be really close integration between an on-prem and a cloud deployment. If you look what Google has done with the Anthos project, they're really moving in the direction of providing more of an integrated kind of hybrid platform. So you don't cross a hard boundary and go from a piece of software or a software platform into a managed service. There's more of a gradual transition. Tianzi probably knows more about that than I do, I think.
I actually, I can't say that I know more than you do.
Okay, so maybe then we can move on to the next question would be, sorry, go ahead.
So just overall, I think learning what's out there today and learning things like Kubernetes and Mesos, learning the platforms that are there, the open source platforms especially, things like Spark and Flink are important. But watch for it as it evolves, because it's in one place now, but in a year from now, it's going to be in a different place. And to the degree that you can sort of be aware of that, it helps in where you focus.
Good. Which kind of ties, I think, into my next question. So any predictions on what you think the industry will be at in general, like not just within cloud computing, but just kind of where do you see things being at in the next like 5, 10, 15 years? Any advances you're predicting, or, just for fun,
Just for fun.
Yeah, anything you'd like to see or anything you think will happen, just,
I think definitely like as I don't know 10, 15 years, but everything will be more efficient. Like you're now, like, instead of waiting for a month to develop your app and start a business, get everything done, maybe it's gonna be really, really fast to realize a very creative idea and have the technology to back you up and go to market really fast. I think the efficiency will be incredibly improved because there's cloud. And the world is gonna become more connected.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I would say I expect to see, ML integration into applications continue to grow. So there's, currently today, there's a lot of ML that are in just, a certain percentage of the applications, but as it grows, it's going to be sort of everything. I don't expect ML to be more than an augmentation of what the application is currently doing, but I do expect it to be sort of more commonplace. And what that means for cloud is going to be interesting because you have kind of two different components of that. You have ML at the edge in mobile devices and things like laptops. And then you have the cloud backend for that. So the integration of those two, I think, will continue to grow. And it's hard for me to say how that split is going to come out because they're both getting faster, but the applications themselves are getting more demanding too. So yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you. I know that sometimes that's not an easy question to answer because I think in some ways the next 10, 15 years will probably show us things that we didn't even think possible. So it's definitely not the easiest to predict, but thanks. Okay, let's see. So you guys kind of mentioned this specifically. So this is this is a current snapshot of what, if you just did a quick Google, search in LinkedIn jobs, what types of jobs are out there that deal with cloud. And I think based on today's conversation and the type of work that both Chansey and Robert are doing, you can start to see how it's actually going to be incorporated into a bunch of different types of roles, and it's going to be more commonplace and less standalone. So it's going to be part of, I would assume, part of regular development jobs instead of it being its own entity. But I think regardless of the type of role, cloud computing skills are currently in demand and will only increase in demand. So it's a really good opportunity at the time right now to kind of jump in and hit the ground running. Even if it's not necessarily the space that you saw yourself in when you took your first nano degree or second nano degree, or even came to Udacity to explore. I think it can be utilized in a lot of different ways. And the example job titles that are listed here are ones I pulled from a LinkedIn search when I was just trying to understand what the landscape of today's jobs in cloud is. So for more information, if there's any specific questions you have on jobs in this space or the Nanodegree, I'd encourage you to write into support@Udacity and ask your question, and we'll make sure that it gets addressed. If you have a specific question about the career programs that we offer, then write into career-support@Udacity, and that will get funneled directly to the careers team, and we'll be able to answer your questions specifically. So in the last 10 minutes or so of today's session, I wanted to open up the room and let anybody who wants to ask questions. So at this time, you can unmute yourself if you want to ask a question live, or you can ask it in the chat and I can read it. So if there's any questions that you'd like to ask either Tianzi, Robert, or both, please do so now. And if there aren't any questions, we can go ahead and end the session early, and you guys are welcome to write in to those same email addresses I mentioned earlier and ask them. So any questions? Oh, I think, so we have one. So the Tianzi, it's for you. So if the hiring event you went to was at Udacity's June 2018 hiring partner preview at Google Sunnyvale, I was there too. It was a nice event. So I guess not a question, just a comment. They were there too. Small world. And so from Matt, it looks like, okay, so Matt, the questions you're asking is more about the projects that's currently or part of the Nanodegree program, not necessarily directed for Matt or for Robert or Tianzi. So for that question, I would encourage you to write into support@Udacity to get a full scope of what's included in the syllabus and what the projects are that come with the program. But the questions that I want to ask right now are specifically for either Robert or Tianzi about their experience, what they're working on today, or anything you'd like to ask them. So any other questions? Anyone want to ask a question? Okay. If not, no problem. It's a little nerve-wracking sometimes to ask questions in a group setting. Completely understandable. Oh, we have a question. Okay, so I see a question that came in on chat, and then also somebody raised their hand. So let's ask the question in chat first, and then I'll go to the person who raised their hand. Thank you. Robert, what's the difference between, or I guess for both of you, what's the difference between developer advocate and the developer relations role?
So developer advocate is part of the developer relations team.
Okay.
So DevRel, or developer relations, is a sort of an area within the organization at Google and at a lot of other tech companies. And developer advocate is just one of the roles in that. There's really kind of three roles: developer advocate, developer programs engineer, and developer tech writer. And the way it was explained to me is that the two roles of developer advocate and developer programs engineer are very similar in what they do. It's just the split is a little different. The DPE does like 80% coding and 20% other stuff, and a DA like me does like 20% coding and 80% other stuff. Okay. So, yeah.
Great. So I'm going to go to the person now who raised their hand, and I'm going to unmute you. So you're welcome to go ahead and ask the question now. So the person who raised their hand, you want to go ahead and ask your question? Okay. So maybe not. Let's go ahead. There's a couple questions that came in on the chat. So let's go switch back there. Okay. So we got both questions seem to be relating to how did the projects you worked on in your Nanodegree help you in your current job? So did they, and if so, how? You guys are both thinking.
So for me, in the first Nanodegree I did, there was something called the Capstone project. And for the Capstone, I used TensorFlow to do, it was called an AlexNet model. And TensorFlow was very new at that time. So that was a really good experience, and that actually led to a project I did on contract after that. So that, and of course now I work in TensorFlow, so it was a really useful thing for me.
Great. Anything for you, Tansy? I could see you thinking.
Yes.
Yeah.
So just very generally, when I was collaborating, when I was working on the Udacity projects, I have to put them on GitHub. And before that, as a data scientist, I didn't really have to work with GitHub a lot. But working on my own project is one thing, but working with collaborating with other people on the final project, which was like we have to put all the code together and put it on a self-driving car and really drive it, and that required a collaboration, and really had to learn the harder tricks of using Git. So that's really helpful since I'm working since the part of what I'm doing now is working on client libraries, and my code I need to contribute code in GitHub. Other than that, I am something that I do for could call it 20% project or for fun at work is the tutorials that I write needs to be engaging, and the something that I've wanted to and still planning to do is showing how people could build a Kalman filter. It may be too technical here, but it's something used in predicting like forecasting telemetry data and how something would go using PubSub and basically turning what I learned in the self-driving car nanodegree and putting it into what I know about PubSub and turning that into creative, interesting material that people could read about. Yeah.
So taking something that might not be so engaging, but making it engaging so people kind of get it.
That's engaging.
Okay.
Yeah, Kalman filters are great stuff. Yeah.
Thank you both. I think that was helpful. So we have time for maybe one more quick question. If not, any other questions that come in, let's go ahead and you can ask us at the either support at Udacity if there's a general question, or if it's a career-specific question, ask at career-support. We are recording this session, and we will be sharing it with everybody who expressed interest or RSVP'd for today's session. So keep an eye out for an email that'll include the recording link as well as some additional resources. So with that being said, let's go ahead and just thank you both for joining today and for participating and sharing your experience and answering our questions. It's really appreciated. And thank you everybody for joining us. And I hope to see you at future events. And please keep an eye out for that email. And we'll talk to everybody soon. Okay. Have a good one. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.